And bring that.
Well, we're late, but we made it. Good evening, everybody. Glad that everybody could. I see people joining in real quick now. I appreciate waiting and your patience for us to get on the air. Welcome to episode 247, I believe, of Line Upon Line. 247 or 248. I'd have to look it up because I'm a little out of sort right now, but. And we're going to talk about Molech and abortion. So, episode 248. So we're going to talk about Molech and the ancient god of child sacrifice, and how it ties in with modern day abortion. So, Dr. Ricks, if you would start us out with some jokes, we could use a little humor.
Okay. The world of high tech. Don't let the computer know you really need it. Anyway, the guy says, these are some jokes for us people are pushing against being senior citizens. I hate it when I see an old person, then realize that we went to high school together. Yeah. Now, this particular one is interesting. It's called Praying for a Coffee Cake. A man decides that he is just really becoming obese. He says, I've got to get on my wife's diet. So he gets on his wife's diet and he even starts to exercise. Even changes his route to work so he doesn't pass by his favorite bakery shop. One day there's a detour and he goes by the bakery shop and they have these fabulous coffee cakes. He can smell them. They smell so good. And he makes a prayer to God. He says, Lord, if you want me to make an exception of my diet, have one of these big, juicy, gorgeous coffee cakes, you'll open up a parking space right in front of the bakery. And sure enough, after the 10th try, it opened up. Just for the sake of time, I'll tell a short joke. And I may save my senior wedding for next week or later. This guy's being philosophical. And he says to himself, you know, I think the decline in child spanking and the rise of all these disrespectful little brats and horrible young criminals are totally related. I guess that would be as funny as it is true.
You said I'm waiting here.
Well, for the humor part, they don't believe it, but it's true. I heard some guy on Fox News. He made a clever argument. Actually, I didn't think he was so hot, but I'm sure he felt he was. He said, look at how good I turned out, and I didn't have a father. What's all this mess talking about we need more fathers in the inner city? You know? Anyway, you know, you just can't use one person to prove the norm. Anyway, but I'm getting off the subject. I think today's subject is an interesting one. For those of you that are out there, someone wrote in last week, or it might have been a few days beyond last week, and they said, why don't you do a Bible study on Molech? At first, I thought to myself, when I read the email, and how it may relate to today's world. The guy lives somewhere on the West Coast, so I thought, he sees a lot of mess out there, I'm sure. And I thought, well, we've talked about, you know, paganism in the past. Is there anything else to say? And then what I emailed him back was, I said, if we can find enough material, we'll do it. I'm mentioning that in case others have Bible topics that you want. Now, we might or might not do it for a variety of reasons, and one might be there's just not enough new material, or we've covered similar things in the past. But you never know. We might be able to do the topic that you want. So anyway, Molech was the ancient god of child sacrifice. So I'm titling this Moloch, the god of child sacrifice and modern abortion. You see where I'm going, don't you? But I think it's worth mentioning.
I thought you were going Hollywood. Seems to be a theme there as well.
Hollyweird, right? I mean, no. Well, you know, the thing is that Hollywood does work on our moral values. For instance, with some relatives, and they had me watch this famous movie, The Green Mile, and I will admit it was, and I'm not recommending you watch the movie because, anyway, but it was the greatest anti-death penalty movie I've ever seen. You see that movie and you think, oh, the death penalty is so horrible. Of course, the special effects they did were very dramatic and all that. And I thought to myself, I've heard of when the police are dealing with criminals, very violent drug criminals and others, if they still have the death penalty as an option to negotiate with the criminals, they can actually, they save lives, make progress. There's something to fear. But of course, that argument would never even be touched in one of those movies. It's all about feelings, and you watch the movie and you feel, well, we could never have a death penalty.
You know, for me, the greatest death penalty idea, you know, for me, is the death penalty. That kept me from doing stuff to get the death penalty. You know, so for me, that makes sense. I don't touch the stove. I don't want to sit in an electric chair. You know?
Yeah, I really believe that I know that there are mistakes made, and I'm not trying to make light of mistakes, but I bet if you took it on balance, both in prison and out of prison, the death penalty as an option, especially if they really administered, didn't take 25 years to do it, maybe take 2 or 3, be sure they've got the right guy, you know, try to be careful. I'll bet the deaths that would prevent far outnumber the mistakes. I'm not making light of the mistakes, of course.
And with new DNA information too, it's making it much more obvious. I mean, you can't fake your DNA.
Yeah.
There are people getting freed.
Yeah. And as science gets better, I think less mistakes will be made. We probably need tort reform and all kinds of stuff to make the legal system work better, but that's all other issues. But getting back to the horrors of paganism, you realize, speaking of life and death, the people in the ancient world and their superstitious fear, they fed a lot of, mostly babies, but not always. Like the Aztecs bragged that their sacrifices were adults, but regardless. But mostly it was babies they sacrificed to Molech and other gods so that they would have wisdom, prosperity, peace. It's kind of amazing. Nobody even, I think in the modern world, well, let me describe what Molech looked like. He looked like a minotaur. Best way I can describe it, a minotaur has horns and a bull's head and kind of a human arms and a pot belly that's more like a pot belly stove where they would put, you know, wood and coal and, you know, have a good fire going. So then anything they threw in there would get burned to death. Now, there are some versions where they have his hands cupped and the fire is kind of coming underneath there. And they can throw the baby in the cupped arms. Either way, it's got to be a gruesome death. And they did that in great numbers.
Yeah, the Maya did adults as well as children. They mixed it up. I find it interesting that you find the same symbols and the same thought process as far away as the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico, almost South America, all the way to the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the symbolism of Satanism and paganism and all that seems to be pretty much universal.
It is. It's well, you know, and I was thinking today, I've been thinking about some different things, and I think this kind of fits with idolatry. It seems that demons will attach themselves to an object or an idol or something to that effect, and when people get passed down these objects and idols and things, it seems that the problems will continue with that. You know, I know someone whose mother, she's dead now, but she passed down all these objects and things to her daughter, and her mother was into witchcraft and demonism, this sort of stuff. And this lady went out and dug a hole and buried them someplace and left them. She said, I didn't want to even touch it, see it, be around it. And her mother, who was into this, eventually committed suicide. But the same mindset, the same idolatry, that's regardless. They were Asian people, but regardless of where you are in the world, it seems that it manifests very similar, if not the same.
I think the value of human life, you all can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
The value of human life, I think in a lot of cultures is not what it is now. I mean, not what it is in Western countries, like especially America. Of course, maybe we don't value life as much as we used to, but and so maybe they didn't feel the pain of throwing babies and children to Molech, but it's a terrible thing. Let's go look at the first slide. We want to just look at what God said about it, because I believe it's, maybe we know it, but we ought to keep reminding ourselves of it.
Leviticus 18:21, and you may not make any of your children go through the fire as an offering to Molech, and you may not put shame on the name of your God. I am the Lord.
Let's go to the next slide too. We'll just kind of make a point of these first two slides. It'll show you what God thinks of this kind of paganism.
And then Leviticus 21, and the Lord said to Moses again, say to the children of Israel, if any man of the children of Israel or any other man living in Israel gives his offering to Molech, he is certainly to be put to death. He is to be stoned by the people of the land.
You know, when you put a death penalty on a crime, that shows you what God thinks of it. This is a high crime, sacrificing children to Molech. As far as God's law, you put a death penalty, that's the highest, the worst kind of crime you can put in there. And then let's go to the next one. This slide, it's a little surprising because I really hadn't thought about it that much.
All right, 1 Kings 11:7. Then did Solomon build a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of the Moabites, on the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon.
Now, what we think happened was that Solomon was close to God and was a great leader and great king, but as he accumulated wives in his later years, some of those wives turned him to their favorite god, and one of them, I guess, or several, actually had him put up Moloch, you know, a much hated idol. And the reason the Israelite nation got divided was because God was so angry at Solomon for this sin. And that, you know, Solomon proves something else too. You might have been in the church for 30 years and you say, well, I got it made. I'm old now and there's no way I can slide away from God. Well, Solomon was getting older and he slid away. So age does not guarantee you can't slide away. Right, Dave?
You know, looking at my past with all the people I've known for so long in the church, it amazes me to see people who I've known for my entire life that just one day walk away. I don't understand it, you know. I think I talked about that last week. It's somebody that you've known, you grew up with their kids or whatever, and not only do the parents, but the kids, all of them just go away. And then it doesn't make sense to me when you've given up so much of your life and changed and didn't do Christmas and gave up the the food laws and maybe didn't get the career you wanted. All these things you gave up so that you could worship God, and now you're well into your 70s and you got 8 years left and you walk away. It's just mind-boggling to me.
It is, isn't it?
Maybe they were never really called. Maybe they academically understood, but it wasn't in their heart, And if it wasn't in their heart, it wasn't in their mind and their presence, and it was just academic, but then maybe they're not completely lost, hopefully.
Well, one thing is sure, God's going to be the judge, and he'll be a fair judge. So, Christ will make the decision. But all we can say is if you understand the truth, try and stick with it.
Better hang on to it.
Try and stick with it.
Hang on to it for dear life. It's like the guy came out of my place that was talking about funeral plots and burial plans, and I don't have time for this. And finally I said, the last thing I'm ever going to need is this. But anyway.
Yes, I understand. Well, let's go to our next slide. All
right. 2 Kings 23:10. And he defiled Topheth, which is in the valley of the sons of Hinnom, that no man might cause his son or daughter to pass through the fire to Molech. And he abolished the horses that the kings of Judah had appointed to the sun at the entrance of the house of Jehovah, by the chamber of Nathan Melech, the chamberlain, which was in the suburbs, and burned the chariots of the sun with fire.
Well, the chariots of the sun were just some idols that supposedly took the sun arching through the sky. And if you were sun worship, that was all one of the idols. But Josiah destroyed all these terrible idols, smashed them up. And that would include Molech. And what we find out is that Molech idol, and they would burn children in a valley of Hinnom right outside Jerusalem. And they think Molech started this matter of burning bodies. And they later expanded that whole valley to become a burning garbage dump. And we think the concept of hellfire came out of, I'll call the burning garbage dump outside Jerusalem, the Valley of Hinnom. And the core start of that was Molech. So we know that the hell, ever-living, ever-burning hellfire is from paganism. But we believe at least part of it got into Christianity because they refer to that Valley of Hinnom where they burn garbage. And in a sense, as GTA said in his booklet, where the fly never dies, it only means they're always putting more garbage in there so that anytime you go there, there's always going to be flies. And that's, that people can misunderstand that. But sun worship and baby sacrifice and Molech are all related together. That's kind of what I was thinking. So remember, when you're keeping the day of the sun god, you're kind of somewhat associated with Molech and sacrificing babies.
And the other thing too is, it was named that day for a reason. But all of these things are physical, and God's laws are spiritual. Right back to Christ when he said, the only sign I give you is as Jonah was in the fish for 3 days. Everything is spiritual in God's world. And all these physical things are of man.
And, I can see how if you're superstitious and backwards, you could worship physical things like the sun.
If you have no other knowledge and your parents tell you, hey, look at that, and you see it dries up the rain and it makes things grow and it makes you feel good when you're out in it. And they go, well, that's where God lives. Well, you don't read or write. You've got, primitive idea, live in a primitive, it makes sense. That must be where God lives.
Well, it's the most prominent thing in people's life as far as it brings warmth, it brings us, you can, it makes things grow and all that stuff. So I'm sure they just associated that with all this. And it's, they turned to that instead of the real God. So it was a most prominent thing in the sky every day. It seemed to,
well, and things in the shade don't live. They don't grow as big, or they don't live. And it doesn't take long to realize you need sun for things to grow. So that's the power from God. Make it, it would make perfect sense to somebody with no other idea.
Yeah. And let's put another slide in there, which talks about the same topic, but it just kind of fills up the topic a little bit more.
All right, Jeremiah 32:35. And they have built the high places of Baal, which are in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to cause to pass through. Did I already read this one? No. To pass through the sons and daughters of Molech, which I commanded them not, neither came into my mind that they should do this abomination, to cause Judah to sin. And now therefore Jehovah, the God of Israel, saith thus concerning this city, whereof ye say, it hath been given over into the hand of the king of Babylon by the sword and by the famine and by the pestilence.
That's how much God hated Molech worship. Because of Molech, and maybe some related items, Israel, the nation of Judah, went into captivity for 70 years. And of course, that's a big part of the Bible, them coming out of captivity. The next topic is when we tell people, well, we're doing the same thing in the modern world when we sacrifice babies for convenience and prosperity. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but it's similar. Let's say if, and I understand, childbearing is difficult and all that, but let's say if a family says to themselves, having a kid is going to cost us money, or maybe it's a young couple and they get pregnant by accident, and the guy says, I don't want any child support payments and all that other stuff. We're going to be a lot more prosperous if we just abort the baby. Aren't we in the same way doing something similar?
It's usually the first one. And by the way, if that's my daughter, don't tell me it was an accident, buddy. You're not going to come here and say it was an accident. No, meet my shotgun. Here's another accident going to happen. Convince me of that. But from what I have understood, it was usually the firstborn, because that has the most value, and that kind of thing. So today, it's like you're pregnant and you were hoping it wouldn't happen, but you're living a lascivious lifestyle, and so you want to maintain that lascivious lifestyle. And this is going to ruin everything. I can't be with my friends. I have an idea. Let's murder that baby. And it's kind of, I'm still looking for prosperity, so I'll sacrifice this child's life with the hope of prosperity of whatever it is you're looking for.
It's basically the same thing they were doing back then, because they were expecting to get prosperity out of it.
Exactly.
So, yeah. How you doing? Can you hear us, Dr. Rich?
Yeah, I can hear you. Just checking this.
Now that this was we mentioned this on the program probably a year or two ago. But there was a guy that come out. His name is Zachary King. He claimed to be he was a former Satan worshiper. He claimed that he performed satanic rituals inside abortion clinics.
Wow.
They would let him in, and I posted the link. Here's the article. I posted the link on our page, on our Facebook page, under this program. So if you go to this program, the last one listed, the first one you'll see this link underneath there. But this guy claimed, and I read this article a few years ago, and it's if it's true, no way to really know, but if you read this, it's pretty compelling, and it's quite disturbing, to say the least. So this stuff, if this guy's telling the truth, it's still going on today, just as bad as it was then, and for the same exact reason, for doing the same exact thing. So,
what's his name?
His name is Zachary King. So the deal is he converted to Christianity some time ago, but he tells his story. You can read it. I think it's rather interesting. Like I said, I read it a few years ago, and there's you Google him, you can find all kinds of stuff on him. So I don't know if it's true or not, but if he claims it is, and so it's something to think about.
The way progressives fight for abortion, it almost makes it have a spiritual hold on them, like it's their holy grail.
It's the Eucharist of the feminist movement.
That and the transgender thing. It kind of goes hand in hand with this insanity.
You might not know this, but the state of Arkansas passed a law, and I don't want to say all the details, but the gist of it is, to do an abortion in Arkansas, you have to have a doctor with whatever the connections to hospital and surgery and all those licenses. Because if something goes wrong in the abortion, you want him to be licensed and able to quickly get him to the hospital and do all that repair surgery stuff. In other words, it'll make the abortion medically safer. I'm sure you know how the ACLU and many other progressive groups reacted to that.
Oh yeah, they fought it tooth and nail. They hate it.
Yeah, and now the Supreme Court so far is letting it stand, but they're still fighting it out in other court levels. And with the liberal judges, they may eventually win. But you would think, don't you want abortions to be safer and safer? They claim, because they have slipshod operations in Arkansas, I guess, that it may run out of business, the ones they got in the state of Arkansas, because they can't meet that standard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's some.
I was reading an article the other day that said abortion is never done because of the life of the mother. It's almost 0%. The life of the mother is zero consideration in it, because it never happens that the life of the mother, you have to have an abortion to save her life. Now, I'm sure it happens, but it's almost zero.
But isn't the mother's job to give her life for the baby? I mean, I would give my life for my son. I would give my life for my wife and my family members. This guy 2 houses down, not so much, but I'm just trying to be funny. It's 3 houses. But the point is that especially as a Christian, wouldn't you lay down your life for an unborn child? They're making a fuss about this guy that scaled the outside of a building where a baby was hanging. And it's another country, but this guy, like Spider-Man, climbed this building to save this baby. They made him a firefighter and gave him citizenship and everything else because he was a foreigner. Wouldn't any Christian lay their life down for somebody else, especially the least of us, the ones that's never committed a crime, has never hurt anybody? It's just a perfect little baby. Wouldn't a mother lay her life down? I hear about mothers that pick up cars off of children, So what kind of a mother would do the exact opposite?
Well, what you're hearing a lot more of is mothers doing the exact opposite nowadays, because we do not value life. Mothers are letting things happen to their children and doing things to their children because we do not value life anymore. They know that they could have just ended that child at any time. So what value does it have? It has no value. If they could have, 3 weeks ago before it was born, I could have killed it. So if it screams too loud, why can't I, bust it in the head? I mean, that's the way they're thinking because of society.
Yeah,
we've done that to our own society because of abortion.
30 years ago, I don't remember ever hearing of a mother killing her kids. Now you do. I mean, fathers too, of course, but mothers, I don't remember it ever. I'm sure it must have happened, but it's so rare. Now it's not all that rare. You hear them every so often.
And there are some politicians that want to make it where you can abort them up to a year after they're born.
I've heard at least 2 or 3 weeks after they're born, and I believe Hillary Clinton was one, and so was Obama. Now they didn't, the bill didn't pass, but up to, was it 2 weeks after it was born, you can abort it. And now that ought to shock me, but yeah, but I heard the voice okay that he supported that. So progressive do support at least a few days after they're born, killing them if you want to, which is scary. But what they say is the baby is only tissue. Let's pull up our next two slides to show that the Bible does not support that. And we need to remember this.
All right. Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I hallowed thee. I appointed thee a prophet unto the nations. Galatians 1:5. But when God, who set me apart, even from my mother's womb, and called me by his grace. Luke 1:41. And it came to pass, as Elizabeth heard the salutation of Mary, the babe leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and cried out with a loud voice and said, Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb. And whence is this to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For behold, as the voice of thy salvation sounded in my ears, the babe leaped with joy in my womb.
And
they can't have these verses out there. That's another reason why the left has got to just get rid of the Bible, because these things, put to shame the frog and all the other excuses they use for abortion. They said just a mass of cells. No.
My niece was born in her second trimester. Okay. She had to be in an incubator for some time, but that was a baby. And today she's a master's degree and very educated and writes for, I don't know, Wall Street Journal or somebody. I don't know. It would have been real easy to have said, oh, this is not a baby. Okay. She was in the second trimester, and you could hold her in one hand. And today she's very successful and very pretty and very talented lady.
And those scriptures we read. The last one is the most interesting. Mary's cousin, Elizabeth, they both were pregnant. But when the pregnant baby heard Christ, mother, and I guess recognized Christ in the womb, the baby leaped for joy inside. And it was the two fetuses celebrated each other. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. But the fetuses celebrated. And you got to be alive. Of course, Paul and Jeremiah God said they were chosen when they were fetuses to be great prophets. Now, that's amazing. So anyone questions what the Bible says, probably they really don't care. But if they do, the Bible lets you know that a fetus is alive, and it's not just dead tissue.
Well, science right now, I had a lady, she wanted to do a shooting class, and she said, I have to do it by this date, because after this date, the sound, the baby will affect the baby in the womb. It could scare him. So she had done the research on when you could not shoot a gun after this time, or hear loud music or pops or fireworks or whatever, because that baby would not know what that was, and it would be very upsetting to the baby in her womb. She made sure to protect that baby. She's a pretty good mom, this lady is. So I'm sorry, but there's just way too much science to tell you that's a human being.
And by the way, there are ultrasounds where they can show, at least I've seen it in a video, where you're trying to stick a fetus with a needle for medical, and the fetus is struggling in the liquid in the mother's womb to avoid the pain of the needle. It's just like anybody would, I guess. In other words, they can move and jump and hear certain. They say a mother's music, as the fetus gets bigger, can help the baby and appreciate music. I mean, those are all. We do know the fetus can feel pain. That much they do know, and move to avoid it. That is the sign of being an individual. Let's go to the next scripture, because I want to describe the spirit of death and the spirit of life, or philosophy of death, philosophy of life.
All right, Deuteronomy 30:15. See, I have set before thee this day life and good, and death and evil. And then I command thee this day to love Jehovah thy God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, and his statutes, and his ordinances, that thou mayest live and multiply, and that Jehovah thy God may bless thee in the land whither thou goest to possess it.
So God said there were two ways. One way was life, the other way was death. I would argue that progressivism, at least some elements of progressivism, are set on death. Now, usually because it's a state-run healthcare system, normally the most costly medicine is spent on infants and the elderly. So for infants, let's abort them, get rid of them. Actually, there are some that are even telling women not to have babies, not even one or two. Get rid of infants, or at least get rid of them. Like in England, we've seen recently, faster than they ought to if they start costing you money. And then with the elderly, they went to euthanasia. When they start costing you money, give them some pills and poison them. Now, they wouldn't put it that bluntly, but can you see it's a culture of death? But also, when the progressives started at the beginning of the 20th century, around 1910, 1920s, they also came up with something else, eugenics, which I think means good birth or words to that effect. And their theory was, we will make the human race better by getting rid of the people that we considered undesirable. Now, of course, you're going to say, who gets to decide who's undesirable? Well, the elites do, of course. And abortion was a big part of that. They wanted to abort the babies of those they considered bad birth that they didn't like. Now, someone like Hitler, who was a socialist, because remember, the Nazi Party stands for National Socialist Party. They say, well, the Nazis are the opposite of the communists. Well, in one way they are, another way they're not. They're both socialistic. The communists are more socialistic, but the Nazis are socialists too. It's like rivals, like Pepsi and Coke. They wanted to be the ones who control the great socialist government, or the Nazis, and they fought in the streets of Europe. In the 20th century, the communists and the Nazis fought. Their gangs fought all the time, but they're both socialistic. Believe me, Hitler was for big government and running your life. He confiscated everybody's guns. They had a Gestapo police force spying on each other. Definitely big socialistic government. But there were some differences. But he used the eugenics theory to justify the final solution. I know we're going to say, but Jews are brilliant and talented and musical and all that we Americans would say. But in Europe, anti-Semitism has been around for years. So the Nazis could tell a lot of people, we consider them undesirable. And he used the philosophy that's used by progressives today. Hitler used a branch of that to justify the final solution. Now, no one will admit that, but it's true.
Well, actually,
it's true.
Ben Stein did do a thing on that, and that's what he said. It's interesting. Margaret Sanger was probably Jewish because Sanger is a Jewish name. And there are some churches now. I've been the last week or so watching some videos, and there are some churches out there. They're very anti-Semitic and saying the most horrible things about the Jewish people in the name of Christ. One guy actually, at the end of the video, got a blood test done. It turned out he was Jewish and didn't know it. And then he started trying to backtalk and say, well, it doesn't matter anymore because the Spirit of Jesus is in me. But up until that point, he had been pretty hard insulting the Jewish people. It's a couple hour long video that I sat through once and a half. And they interview multiple different pastors who really condemn the Jewish people in the name of Jesus.
Yeah, and that's been one of the problems historically, is that people in Europe, at least some at some points, have really been pogroms on the Jews every so often. and Hitler took it to a new high. But the theory is that theory of death instead of life. Christ said, love your enemies. But progressives say, let's get rid of the people that we think are inferior. And that is scary business. I mean, maybe everything is scary, but you think about a big government with a lot of power, controlling everybody, like in Germany and Central Europe. By the way, I believe this is true. The Nazis didn't just kill Jews. They sent 5 million non-Jews to concentration camps. Certain religions they didn't like, people they thought were mentally ill, political opponents, and I think a couple other categories. So that, a lot of people could be at risk when crazy people with death theories get in control. And remember, Margaret Sanger said that she wanted to get rid of, and the word back then was Negro. They didn't use the term African American or color, but she wanted to get rid of the Negro population and some Hispanics as well, and then those that they thought were mentally slow. And they pushed abortion as a major way to do it. And the scary thing is, this is where it really is discouraging. The Democratic Party, or at least the progressives within the party who run it, will go to the mat to fight for abortion.
Yeah, at one point there's a study. Somebody has to look it up, but somebody did the math, and I think the African American population today is 14%. If it wasn't for abortion, it would be somewhere around close to 30. And most of the abortion clinics, it's in the high percentages, are in Black neighborhoods. I mean, it's still happening. It hasn't changed, and everybody ignores it. I mean, people need to wake up to what's happening to their country and what the people are doing to them. So,
and it's scary. You would think, and anybody remember we much discussed that if you confront people with the facts, they get mad at you. Well, that's what I've seen. We confront with certain facts, like you talk about certain unemployment facts, they get mad at you. They don't want to hear it. I can't explain it, but it's like nobody wants to know. And I would say, as years go on, they're going to put abortion clinics in poor neighborhoods. The elite's kids will be less affected by, well, maybe they could sneak off getting an abortion. But the point is, the most vulnerable people in society will be the ones that are going to be hurt by it. And I'll just give you my family's abortion story. When I was real young, Carol and I, about the same age, we grew up together. I won't go into all the details. But unfortunately, she got pregnant at 16. It was back then, that was a big deal, big gossip. People didn't do that much. I realized that was that was over half a century ago, about a half. Anyway, it was a big deal at the time. Well, of course, our family wouldn't do anything like that. We're good Baptists. We didn't get an abortion. And in retrospect, the baby she had is now the cornerstone of one wing of the family, because Carolyn died young. I don't go into all the details. She got, I think cigarettes killed her at a very early age. She was a very sensitive person and a heavy smoker. But there may be other factors. But the point is, Pam has really made all the difference for Carolyn's mother, and just for that, anchored that whole family. I'm saying this is just a personal example. The hole that she would have left in the family if she had been aborted for convenience is enormous. Nobody, of course, can know. They'll say, well, how can you know that be true of others? You can't, but it's got to be true of a fair number, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm looking. I just looked up the percentage. It says there was a study in 2012 based on 2010 census. 79% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facilities were located within walking distance of a Black or Hispanic neighborhood. 79%.
And believe me, the media won't touch that statistic with a 10-foot pole. You know about racism, but they're doing it, and no one will talk about it. I saw this stat somewhere that abortion is the leading cause of death in the Black community, if you count those as babies. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. Nobody knows that. I mean, that's a
I thought it was
statistic that's not known.
AR-15s. They make you think it's AR-15s. No, it's doctors.
Yeah, and like Gosnell, who had an abortion clinic that was a baby mill, a number of women died. Here's something that we've heard, and I believe it to be true. They had the stats. It's when it comes to late-term abortions, abortions are more dangerous to the mother's life than a natural childbirth. You might ask yourself, how is that possible? My only guess is when they go in there to grab that baby and crush its head with forceps, or they go in there to slice the fetus up and pull it out in pieces, isn't there a chance they could damage some tissue in there more than if the baby is squeezed out naturally? And that's why it's more dangerous. Nobody knows it because they give the impression that abortions are safe. Abortion clinics are often not the highest surgical standards because the Progressive Party won't let states put them on high standards because they don't want to raise the price of abortions. They want to abort as many babies as they can. That's why I call it the culture of death. Now, which culture do you think Satan is behind? The culture of death or the culture of life?
I think it's pretty obvious what one party and one philosophy, the progressive one, states that you can't do anything without the government. You need the government for everything that you get or do. Your value is nothing, and abortion they support. I mean, this last week they've come out for MS-13, for North Korea, for you name a bunch of things, and it's just obvious that they only care about one thing: being in charge and getting elected. I mean, that's all they want to do is being in charge, getting elected. Don't care how they do it, but that's what they do.
I heard a guy said they were celebrating on TV when the North Korean deal looked like it was going down. And that when now that it's coming back on, they were criticizing the on back and forth negotiations instead of celebrating the fact that we'll see. No one can promise what will happen. But 25 million people live on the edge of starvation, and at least several 100,000 live in some version of gulags, and death camps. Well, maybe much of that's coming to an end in the next few years. You think they'd be, and of course, the fear of atomic missiles being sold to Middle Eastern characters and others. You think they celebrate that, but they see that as going to make it hard for them to win the next election and get control. So they don't care about the starving people in North Korea if it keeps them from winning the next election. I mean, doesn't it seem that bad?
It does. That's the sad part, and a large percentage. I think the people that are figuring these things out are waking up, are growing slowly, but is it enough? I don't know.
Yeah, it's true. And I think people may know more than the ancients who worshipped Molech, but I don't think we're any better than they were.
No, it doesn't look like it, does it?
No,
Yeah, knowledge can increase, but morality has got to increase as well. And if morality doesn't increase, knowledge then becomes evil. Because you'll use the knowledge, the science, to perpetuate the evil. It's my thought.
It's so true. Now, back with power. I'm not sure what we're going to cover next week, but send in your ideas, what we might come up with. As far as watching world events and prophecy, I'll just give two thoughts occur to me. Everybody is complaining about trade war because of tariff and tariff retaliations. And I suppose we have to see that could be a big problem in the future. And I know Italy is having a banking crisis, so that's a problem for Europe and the EU. But I would say on the whole, there's another way of looking at it. America is throwing its power around, trying to get a better trade deal because, these countries all cheat on America. We're Uncle Sucker, Uncle Sap. Almost every country, there may be a few exceptions, but they all have higher tariffs on buying American manufactured goods than selling, and then the stuff that they sell to us. They protect their markets. Now they would argue, well, America's prosperous, they can afford it. But American workers need good jobs too.
Yep.
So maybe when this all ends, there's a possibility that we'll actually level the trade stuff more so. It'll never be totally fair, but leveling it more so that'll make America more prosperous and America stronger. I don't know where that fits in the prophecy, but that tells me that Europe is not ready yet. But maybe this trade war will get Europe all united against America and they'll all come together and become the beast. I don't think so, but it's possible, right?
Yep, it's possible. All right. If no one has any other comments, then I guess we have reached the end. I'm glad we got started. Sorry we got started a little late. So thanks again for tuning in or for watching us regardless. So everyone enjoy the rest of your Sabbath, and we'll see you all back here again next week. And we'll let the ending roll here.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.